I stood in the pouring rain outside my childhood home, my suitcase growing heavy in my trembling hand, still unable to believe what had just happened. 24 hours after my beloved grandfather's funeral, my father, Walter, had just thrown me out with the coldest words I'd ever heard. "You're useless now that the old man's gone. I don't need you anymore." The $82 million inheritance had transformed him into someone I didn't recognize. Lightning illuminated the house, where I'd grown up, where I thought I belonged, where I believed family meant something. But as I turned to walk away, I had no idea that in just 48 hours, everything would reverse in the most shocking way possible. 3 days earlier, we had buried my grandfather, Thomas, under a gray October sky at Greenwood Cemetery. The service was beautiful, filled with hundreds of people whose lives he had touched through his business empire and charitable work. I sat in the front row, tears streaming down my face, while my father, Walter, sat rigid beside me, checking his phone throughout the entire ceremony. Grandpa Thomas had been my anchor since my mother passed away from cancer 2 years ago. Every Sunday, we would sit on his back porch, drinking sweet tea and talking about everything from his early days, building his construction company, to his worries about preserving family values in a world obsessed with money. He would always end our conversations by taking my hand and saying, "Andrea, remember that character is the only true wealth." The funeral reception was held at the elegant Riverside Country Club, where grandfather had been a member for 30 years. I moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and sharing memories, while Walter stood near the bar already working on his third whiskey. I noticed how he avoided eye contact with grandfather's longtime employees, people who had worked for the company for decades, and considered Thomas more of a father figure than a boss. The next morning, we gathered at the law offices of Patterson Holbrook and Associates for the reading of the will. The mahogany-paneled conference room felt suffocating as lawyer James Patterson adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and began reading grandfather's final wishes. My heart pounded as he announced that Walter would inherit the main estate valued at approximately $82 million, including the construction company, real estate holdings, and investment portfolio. I received only 2 items: grandfather's old leather journal with its worn brown cover and his vintage fountain pen, the one he used to sign every important business document. The gifts felt meaningful to me, but I could see Walter smirking as Patterson handed me the simple items. Other family members received modest cash bequests, and several charities were designated to receive ongoing support. The transformation in Walter began immediately. As we left the lawyer's office, he strutted down the sidewalk with a swagger I'd never seen before. $82 million, he kept repeating under his breath. "Can you believe it, all mine?" That evening, back at the family home where I'd been living since Mother's death, Walter poured himself an expensive scotch from grandfather's collection and settled into the leather chair that had always been Thomas's spot. I was washing dishes from the simple dinner I'd prepared when he cleared his throat. "Andrea, we need to talk." His voice had taken on a sharp edge that made my stomach clench. I dried my hands and turned to face him, hoping we might finally comfort each other in our grief. Instead, I saw a stranger wearing my father's face. "Now that the old man's gone, things are going to change around here." He began swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "I've been thinking, and frankly, it's time you started taking care of yourself." The words hit me like cold water. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you need to find your own place. You're 28 years old, Andrea. You should be independent by now, not living off family charity." I felt my knees go weak. "Dad, this is my home. I've lived here since Mom died. I thought after losing Grandpa, we'd want to stick together." Walter's laugh was bitter and foreign. "Stick together for what the old man always babied you, filling your head with sentimental nonsense about family loyalty. But I see reality clearly now. I have responsibilities, investments to make, a future to build." "But Grandpa always said family was the most important thing," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Your grandfather was from a different generation," Walter snapped. "He didn't understand modern economics. I'm going to do something productive with this inheritance, not waste it on outdated sentimentality. I tried one more desperate approach. Dad, please. I know we haven't always been close, but after Mom died, I thought we were building something together. Remember how you said you needed me here to help you through the grief? His eyes hardened to ice. That was before I had options, before I had real money and real opportunities. I don't owe you anything, Andrea. You got your little mementos from the old man. That's enough. The room seemed to spin around me. Where am I supposed to go? I work at the marketing firm downtown, but I can barely afford rent in this city on my salary. Walter stood up, walking to the window that overlooked grandfather's carefully tended garden. That sounds like a personal problem. I've already spoken with a realtor. This house is going on the market next week. The final blow landed with devastating force. Next week, Dad, that's impossible. I need time to find a place to save money for a deposit. You have 24 hours, he said without turning around. I suggest you start packing. I spent that sleepless night frantically stuffing my life into cardboard boxes, my hands shaking as I tried to process what was happening. The house felt like a museum of shattered dreams as I moved from room to room, packing photographs of happier times, books from my childhood, and the few pieces of my mother's jewelry that Walter hadn't already sold. At 6 a.m, I called my best friend Sarah, waking her up with my tear-choked explanation. "Of course you can stay here," she said immediately, though I could hear the concern in her voice. Sarah's studio apartment in the city was barely big enough for one person, let alone two, but her generous heart wouldn't let me face homelessness. Walter emerged from his bedroom around noon, already dressed in an expensive new suit I'd never seen before. He surveyed my pile of boxes with cold satisfaction. "Good, you're making progress. The realtor is coming at 3 to take photos." "Dad, please reconsider." I tried one last time. "This house holds so many memories of Mom and Grandpa. Are you sure you want to sell it so quickly?" "Memories don't pay dividends," he replied, straightening his silk tie. "I have appointments with investment advisors this afternoon. Real money requires real decisions." As I continued packing, I found myself drawn to grandfather's leather journal. Opening it carefully, I discovered pages and pages of his handwritten thoughts about business, family, and life philosophy. His familiar script brought fresh tears to my eyes as I read entries about his concerns for the family's future. One entry, dated just 3 months before his death, caught my attention. "I worry about Walter's judgment with money. He has borrowed against his own savings 3 times this year, and I've had to help him cover gambling debts twice. A man who cannot manage $1,000 responsibly will struggle with millions." My hands trembled as I read further. "I've spent my life building something meaningful, not just profitable. The company employs 237 families. The charity foundation feeds 300 children weekly. These responsibilities require wisdom, not just ambition. I pray Walter will grow into the role, but I fear his character has been shaped more by desire than discipline." Another entry, more recent, mentioned safeguards and protection measures. Grandfather had written, "True love sometimes requires difficult choices. A parent must sometimes save a child from their own destructive impulses, even when it causes temporary pain." I was puzzling over these cryptic references when the front door burst open. A woman I'd never seen before strutted in, wearing designer heels and enough jewelry to fund a small business. Her bleached blonde hair was swept into an elaborate updo, and her makeup was applied with professional precision. "Walter, darling, I hope you don't mind that I use my key," she purred, kissing my father on the cheek with glossy red lips. My jaw dropped. "Your key?" Walter had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Andrea, this is Monica. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks." Monica's cold blue eyes surveyed me with obvious disdain. "Oh, this must be the daughter you mentioned, the one who's been living here rent-free." Her voice dripped with false sweetness. "Not for much longer," Walter said quickly. "Andrea is moving out today." Monica clapped her hands together. "Wonderful. I have so many ideas for redecorating. This place is terribly outdated, don't you think, all this heavy wood furniture and family photos everywhere? It needs a complete modernization. I watched in horror as she began pointing to pieces of furniture that had been in our family for generations. That hideous grandfather clock has to go, and these dusty bookshelves are completely wrong for the space. Oh, and Walter, we simply must replace that dreary dining room set. Monica has exquisite taste. Walter said, his voice filled with pride I'd never heard when he spoke about me. She's going to help me transform this place into something sophisticated. As I loaded another box into my car, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. Monica was describing elaborate plans for expensive renovations, designer furniture, and professional landscaping. With $82 million, we can afford to do this right, she said. No more living like middle-class suburbanites. But then I heard Walter's voice drop to a whisper, and I crept closer to the kitchen doorway. "You don't know the half of it," he was saying with a chuckle. "The old fool never knew I was borrowing against his accounts for years. I had access to his financial information through the business, and I've been covering my gambling debts by taking small amounts here and there. He was too trusting and too senile to notice." Monica's gasp was followed by delighted laughter. "Walter, you clever man. So you've actually had access to some of this money all along." "Exactly. The inheritance is just making it official. I've been planning for this day for a long time." I stumbled backward from the doorway, my heart racing. Walter hadn't just inherited the money he was stealing from grandfather while the old man was still alive. The realization made me physically sick, and I had to rush to the bathroom to vomit. When I emerged shaking and pale, Walter was waiting in the hallway. "Finish packing," he said coldly. "Monica and I have dinner reservations at Le Bernardin. We're celebrating properly." As I loaded the last box into my car, I looked back at the house where 4 generations of my family had lived. Walter and Monica were already inside planning its destruction, while I drove away toward an uncertain future, clutching grandfather's journal like a lifeline. Sarah's studio apartment in the downtown arts district was a cramped but cozy space with exposed brick walls and a Murphy bed that we took turns using. She worked as a graphic designer for a small advertising agency and had always been the most loyal friend anyone could ask for. Despite the inconvenience of suddenly hosting a roommate, she greeted me with homemade soup and a box of tissues. "Your father has lost his mind," she declared after I finished explaining the situation. $82 million or not, you don't just throw your own daughter onto the street. That night, unable to sleep on Sarah's lumpy couch, I continued reading through grandfather's journal by lamplight. The more I read, the more disturbed I became by what I discovered. Grandfather had been meticulously documenting his concerns about Walter's character and financial behavior for over 2 years. One entry from 18 months ago read, "Discovered today that Walter has been using company credit cards for personal gambling trips to Atlantic City. The accounting department brought it to my attention when they couldn't categorize the expenses. When confronted, Walter became defensive and accused me of not trusting him. Trust must be earned through consistent behavior, not demanded through blood relation." Another entry more recent contained references to meetings with lawyers and accountants. "Spent the morning with Patterson discussing options for protecting the business and family assets. There are legal mechanisms available that would allow me to ensure the company's mission continues regardless of an heir's personal failings. Patterson has advised me about creating what he calls behavioral safeguards in the inheritance structure." The most troubling discovery came in an entry dated just 6 weeks before grandfather's death. Walter asked me to sign papers that would give him power of attorney over my accounts. He claimed it would simplify business operations if something happened to my health. But my doctor says I'm sharp as a tack, and I've noticed discrepancies in the monthly bank statements. I fear Walter has been taking money without permission. I must protect what I've built, not just for the family's sake, but for all the employees and charities that depend on this foundation. Armed with this new information, I decided to contact some of grandfather's longtime associates. I started with Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, who had worked as his executive assistant for 23 years. She agreed to meet me for coffee at a small cafe near the business district. Mrs. Hayes was a dignified woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and sharp intelligence in her brown eyes. She hugged me warmly when she arrived, expressing her condolences for my loss. "Your grandfather was the finest man I ever worked for," she said, stirring cream into her coffee. "He treated every employee like family and never made a business decision without considering how it would affect people's lives." I showed her some of the journal entries, and her face grew grave. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "your grandfather was deeply worried about your father in his final months. He asked me to help him research legal options for protecting the business from what he called impulsive management. Did he ever mention anything about a different will or additional legal documents?" I asked. Mrs. Hayes glanced around the cafe, then leaned closer. "He made several trips to see Mr. Patterson without your father's knowledge, and there was a day about a month before he passed when he asked me to witness his signature on some important papers. He also gave me something to keep safe for him." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small brass key. "He said this was for a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. He made me promise to give this key to you if anything ever happened to the primary beneficiaries of his will." My heart began racing. A safety deposit box that wasn't mentioned in the will reading? That's right. He said there were things that needed to remain confidential until the right time. That afternoon, I called the estate lawyer's office, but James Patterson was in court all day. His secretary scheduled an appointment for the following morning, noting that it was regarding additional estate matters. Meanwhile, Walter's spending spree was making local news. The society pages featured photos of him and Monica at expensive restaurants, charity galas, and exclusive shopping events. One article mentioned that he had purchased a new Ferrari and was looking at vacation homes in the Hamptons. But more troubling were the calls I started receiving from grandfather's employees. Carlos Mendez, the company's head foreman, who had worked there for 15 years, called to tell me that Walter had fired him without cause or severance pay. "Miss Andrea," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "your grandfather promised me I'd always have a place with this company as long as I did good work. I got 3 kids and a mortgage. I don't understand what happened." Similar calls came from the bookkeeper, 2 project managers, and several long-term construction workers. Walter was cleaning house, removing anyone who had been loyal to grandfather and replacing them with cheaper, less experienced workers. The most heartbreaking call came from Janet Morrison, who ran the children's charity that grandfather had supported for 12 years. "I hate to bother you during this difficult time," she said, "but we haven't received our monthly donation from the Thomas Henderson Foundation. We depend on that money to feed 300 children every week. Without it, we'll have to close the soup kitchen." I realized that Walter wasn't just squandering grandfather's money on personal luxuries. He was destroying the legacy that Thomas had spent his lifetime building. The man who had employed hundreds of people and fed thousands of children was being replaced by someone who cared only about personal gratification. That evening, as Sarah and I shared takeout Chinese food on her tiny kitchen table, I made a decision. "I'm going to fight this," I announced. Grandfather didn't build something beautiful just so Walter could tear it down for gambling money and expensive cars. Sarah nodded firmly. "Good. What's the first step?" "Tomorrow I'm going to see Patterson, and then I'm going to find out what's in that safety deposit box." As I lay on the couch that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city noise outside, I thought about grandfather's words, "Character is the only true wealth." I was about to discover just how much character my grandfather had possessed and how little my father had inherited along with those $82 million. The next morning, I dressed in my most professional outfit and arrived at Patterson Holbrook and Associates 30 minutes early. The law firm occupied the top 3 floors of a prestigious downtown building, and the reception area featured mahogany paneling and oil paintings that spoke of old money and established reputation. James Patterson was a distinguished man in his mid-50s with graying temples and the calm demeanor of someone who had handled complex estates for decades. When his secretary ushered me into his corner office, he stood to shake my hand with genuine warmth. "Andrea, I'm so glad you called," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. I was hoping we would have a chance to speak privately. Mr. Patterson, I've discovered some troubling things about my father's behavior both before and after grandfather's death. I began pulling out the journal. I think there might be more to grandfather's final wishes than what was revealed in the will reading. Patterson's eyebrows raised slightly and he leaned forward with interest. What sort of things have you discovered? I showed him the journal entries documenting Walter's financial improprieties and grandfather's concerns. As Patterson read, his expression grew increasingly serious. Your grandfather was indeed a very thorough man, he said carefully when he finished reading. He came to see me several times in his final months expressing concerns very similar to what you found in his private writings. Mrs. Hayes mentioned that she witnessed him signing additional documents. She also gave me this. I placed the brass key on his desk. Patterson picked up the key, examining it closely. Ah, yes, safety deposit box 307 at First National. Your grandfather was very specific about the timing for accessing this box. What do you mean, timing? Patterson walked to a filing cabinet and retrieved a thick folder marked Henderson Estate, Confidential Addendum. He returned to his desk and opened it carefully. Your grandfather established what we call a behavioral trust structure, he explained. The initial will reading was accurate for the immediate distribution of assets. However, there were additional provisions that would only be activated under specific circumstances. My heart began pounding. What kind of circumstances? Your grandfather was deeply concerned about your father's gambling habits and poor financial judgment. He structured the inheritance with what he called safeguards, designed to protect the family legacy from destruction. Patterson pulled out a document with grandfather's signature at the bottom. According to this provision, if the primary beneficiary spent more than $5 million of the inheritance within 60 days of receipt, and if that spending was deemed frivolous or harmful to the family business or charitable obligations, then an alternative will would take effect. I felt dizzy. An alternative will? Yes, one that would transfer primary control of the estate to someone who had demonstrated better character and judgment. How much has Walter spent so far? Patterson consulted another document. Based on the reports I've been receiving from the bank, your father has spent approximately $6.3 million in the past 3 weeks. The 60-day deadline expires tomorrow. The room seemed to spin around me. Mr. Patterson, I need to see what's in that safety deposit box. An hour later, we were standing in the vault of First National Bank. The safety deposit box was larger than I had expected, and when Patterson helped me open it with both keys, I gasped at the contents. Inside were 3 sets of documents. The first was a complete financial audit of Walter's unauthorized withdrawals from grandfather's accounts over the past 2 years, totaling over $400,000. The second was a detailed alternative, dated just 1 month before grandfather's death, naming me as the primary beneficiary of the estate, with Walter receiving only a modest trust fund contingent on his completing financial rehabilitation counseling. But the third set of documents was the most shocking evidence that grandfather had been secretly working with a private investigator to document Walter's gambling activities, including photographs of him at illegal poker games and records of debts to dangerous creditors. Your grandfather hired the investigator after he discovered the unauthorized account access, Patterson explained as I studied the photographs with trembling hands. He wanted to understand the full extent of your father's problems before making final decisions about the inheritance. The investigator's report painted a devastating picture. Walter owed money to several loan sharks, had been banned from 3 Atlantic City casinos for suspected card counting, and had been using company funds to cover gambling debts for over 18 months. The report also detailed his relationship with Monica, revealing that she was a known associate of several con artists who specialized in targeting wealthy men. Grandfather knew about Monica too, I whispered. He knew about everything, Patterson said gently. The question now is what you want to do with this information. I looked at the alternative will, which not only made me the primary heir, but also included specific provisions for restoring the jobs of fired employees, resuming charitable donations, and requiring Walter to enter a rehabilitation program for gambling addiction. What happens if I choose to activate this alternative will? We would need to file it with the probate court and present evidence of your father's violations of the inheritance conditions. Given the documentation your grandfather assembled, it would be a straightforward legal process. As we left the bank, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Your father owes us $250,000. Payment due tomorrow or we take collateral. You might want to talk to him. I showed the message to Patterson, whose face went pale. Andrea, this situation is more dangerous than just family drama. Your grandfather was right to be concerned about your father's safety, as well as the family assets. That evening, I sat in Sarah's apartment staring at the alternative will, knowing that I held the power to completely reverse everything that had happened since grandfather's death. But using it would mean destroying my father's life, even if he had brought this situation on himself. Sarah placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that grandfather gave me more than just an inheritance, I said slowly. He gave me a choice between revenge and redemption. The next morning would mark the 60-day deadline. Walter had crossed every line grandfather had drawn, but I still had to decide whether justice meant punishment or the chance for my father to learn from his mistakes. As I fell asleep that night, I could almost hear grandfather's voice. Character is the only true wealth. Tomorrow, I would discover whether I possessed enough character to handle the wealth and responsibility he had entrusted to me. I woke up before dawn on the 60th day, my stomach churning with anxiety about the confrontation ahead. Patterson had scheduled an emergency meeting for 9 o'clock in the morning, officially described as a clarification session regarding additional estate provisions. Walter had been told only that there were some paperwork irregularities that needed to be addressed. Sarah made me scrambled eggs and coffee, but I could barely eat anything. You're doing the right thing, she assured me as I got dressed in my most professional black suit. Your grandfather trusted you with this responsibility for a reason. I arrived at the law office 30 minutes early, carrying the leather journal and a folder containing copies of all the documents from the safety deposit box. Patterson greeted me with coffee and a reassuring nod. Are you prepared for this? He asked gently. Your father is likely to be very angry when he realizes what's happening. I'm ready, I said, though my hands were shaking slightly. Grandfather faced difficult decisions his whole life to protect what he built. I can't do any less. At exactly 9 o'clock, Walter arrived with Monica on his arm. She was wearing a new Chanel suit and diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Walter himself looked prosperous, but tired, with the slightly hollow look of someone who had been burning money and energy at an unsustainable pace. I don't understand why Andrea needs to be here, Walter said irritably as we all took seats around Patterson's conference table. This is about estate paperwork, not family therapy. Actually, Patterson said calmly, Miss Henderson's presence is required for what we need to discuss today. He opened the confidential file and pulled out the first document. Mr. Henderson, when you inherited your father's estate 60 days ago, you were given certain responsibilities along with the financial assets. Walter waved his hand dismissively. Yes, I remember all the legal language. What's this about? It's about the fact that your father included specific provisions in his will regarding the stewardship of the inheritance. Patterson continued. Provisions that would be activated if certain conditions were met. Monica leaned forward with interest. What kind of provisions? Patterson ignored her and addressed Walter directly. Your father was aware that you had been taking money from his accounts without authorization for approximately 2 years prior to his death. Walter's face went white. That's ridiculous. I had legitimate access to company funds for business purposes. $412,000 for gambling debts and personal expenses. Patterson asked, consulting the investigator's report, including 23 separate withdrawals to cover losses at illegal poker games. The color drained completely from Walter's face, and Monica's grip tightened on his arm. "Walter, what is he talking about?" "Your father also documented your relationship with Miss Monica Stevens," Patterson continued, including her history of romantic fraud and her association with known confidence artists. Monica shot to her feet. "This is outrageous. You can't make accusations like that without proof." Patterson calmly pulled out a photograph of Monica meeting with two men outside a casino. These are her associates Marcus Webb and Vincent Torres. Both have been arrested multiple times for elder abuse and financial fraud, targeting wealthy widowers. Walter stared at the photograph, then at Monica, realization dawning in his eyes. "Monica, is this true?" "Of course not," she protested, but her voice had lost its confident tone. "These lawyers are obviously trying to manipulate you." Patterson placed another document on the table. "Mr. Henderson, in the 60 days since you inherited your father's estate, you have spent $6.8 million. These expenditures include 2 luxury cars, a down payment on a vacation home, gambling losses totaling over $1 million, expensive gifts for Miss Stevens, and the termination of 12 longtime employees without cause or severance." Walter's hands began trembling. "So what? It's my money now. I can spend it however I want." "Actually," Patterson said quietly, "that's not entirely accurate." He pulled out the alternative will and placed it in front of Walter. "Your father included a provision that if you spent more than $5 million irresponsibly within 60 days, and if you violated the trust he placed in you by harming the business or charitable foundation he built, then an alternative distribution of the estate would take effect." Walter stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Monica leaned over to read it, her face going pale as she saw her name mentioned, specifically in the section about fortune hunters and individuals seeking to exploit the beneficiary's emotional vulnerability. "This is impossible," Walter whispered. "The will was already read. It can't be changed now." "It's not a change," Patterson explained. "It's an activation of provisions that were always part of your father's final wishes. He hoped you would prove worthy of the trust he wanted to place in you, but he was prepared for the possibility that you might not." I watched my father's face crumble as he read through the alternative will, seeing his name reduced to a modest trust fund, while mine appeared as the primary beneficiary. The $82 million inheritance, the business, the foundation, even the family home that he had been so eager to sell, all of it would pass to me. "Walter, darling," Monica said nervously, "surely this is just some kind of legal technicality that can be resolved." But Walter wasn't listening to her anymore. He was staring at me with a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been recognition. "You knew," he said flatly. "You knew this whole time." "I found out 3 days ago," I replied honestly. "Grandfather left me clues in his journal, and Mrs. Hayes had the key to his safety deposit box." Walter's phone buzzed and he glanced at it automatically. His face went even paler as he read the text message. "Monica, I need to speak with my daughter privately." "Absolutely not," Monica protested. "Whatever family drama this is, it involves my future too." "Your future." Walter looked at her with new eyes, seeing past the beauty and charm to the calculating coldness underneath. "According to this investigator's report, your future involves moving on to the next wealthy target once you've extracted everything you can from me." Monica's mask finally slipped completely. "Fine," she snapped, grabbing her designer purse. "When you're finished with this pathetic family melodrama, call me. But don't take too long, Walter. There are other men with better opportunities and fewer complications." She stormed out of the office, leaving Walter staring after her in stunned silence. The silence stretched for a full minute before he turned back to me with tears in his eyes. "That text message," he said quietly. "It was from Vincent Torres, one of Monica's associates. Apparently, I owe them $250,000 for gambling debts I don't even remember incurring. They want payment by tomorrow or they're going to hurt me. Patterson and I exchanged glances. Walter. I said gently, Grandfather documented everything because he loved you. He wasn't trying to punish you. He was trying to save you from destroying yourself and everything he worked to build. Walter buried his face in his hands. $82 million, he said brokenly. I had everything, and I've lost it all in 2 months. I've fired good people, abandoned the charities Dad cared about, and trusted a woman who was stealing from me the whole time. The alternative will include provisions for you to receive help, I said, sliding the document closer to him. Financial counseling, gambling addiction treatment, and a structured allowance that would increase as you demonstrated responsible behavior. Walter looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Why would you want to help me after everything I've done to you? I thought about Grandfather's words about character being the only true wealth, about family meaning more than money, because that's what family does, I said simply. We protect each other even when we make mistakes. For the first time since the funeral, my father looked like the man I remembered from childhood, vulnerable and human, instead of cold and calculating. Andrea, he whispered, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened to me. It was like the money made me crazy, made me think I was somebody different. The money didn't change you, Dad, I said softly. It just revealed what was already there. But people can change if they want to. Grandfather believed that, or he wouldn't have included the rehabilitation provisions. Patterson cleared his throat gently. If you're ready to proceed with the alternative, well, we can begin the legal process immediately. The gambling debts and other financial obligations would be addressed through proper channels rather than through intimidation. Walter nodded slowly. What do I need to do? First, I said, you need to commit to getting help for the gambling addiction. Second, we need to restore the jobs of the people you fired and resume the charitable donations. And third, you need to understand that earning back the family's trust will take time. Walter reached across the table and took my hand. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for the chance to try to earn it back. As we left Patterson's office an hour later, having signed all the necessary paperwork to activate Grandfather's alternative, well, I felt a mixture of relief and responsibility settling over me. Grandfather had given me more than money. He had given me the power to heal our family and continue his legacy of caring for others. The $82 million was no longer Walter's burden to bear alone. Now it was mine, along with the wisdom to use it well. The legal transition of the estate took 3 weeks to complete, during which Walter moved into a modest apartment downtown and began attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings twice a week. I had temporarily moved back into the family home, which felt both familiar and strange after everything that had happened. On a crisp November morning, I was sitting in Grandfather's old study when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a black sedan parked in the driveway with 2 men in expensive suits waiting on the front porch. My stomach dropped as I recognized them from the photographs in the private investigator's report, Marcus Webb and Vincent Torres Monica's criminal associates. I called Patterson immediately. They're here, I said quietly into the phone. Don't open the door, he advised. I'm calling Detective Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit. We've been building a case against these men for months. But before I could respond, I heard the sound of another car pulling up. Walter's voice carried through the door as he spoke to the men. I told you on the phone I don't owe you anything. Monica was running a scam and I have documentation to prove it. I opened the door to find my father standing face to face with Vincent Torres, a hulking man with dead eyes and scarred knuckles. Marcus Webb was smaller but more dangerous looking, with the calculating stare of someone who enjoyed causing pain. Walter, Torres said in a gravelly voice, you borrowed money from us in good faith. The fact that your girlfriend was skimming off the top doesn't change your obligation to pay. I never borrowed anything from you directly, Walter replied, his voice steadier than I had expected. Monica forged my signature on those loan documents. I have handwriting analysis to prove it. Webb stepped closer, invading Walter's personal space. Funny thing about debt, Henderson, it doesn't matter how it got created. It only matters that it gets paid. That's when I stepped outside carrying the folder of evidence Patterson had given me. Gentlemen, I said in my calmest voice, I think you'll want to see these. I handed Webb a copy of Monica's criminal background report, including photographs of her meeting with both men and detailed records of their previous fraud schemes. Monica Stevens' real name, Michelle Kowalski, has been working with you to target recently widowed wealthy men for the past 3 years. Torres snatched the papers from Webb's hands, his face darkening as he read. This doesn't prove anything. It proves that you've been running an elaborate con game, I continued, and that my father was a victim, not a willing participant. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit has been investigating your operation for 8 months. Webb and Torres exchanged nervous glances. You're bluffing. Am I? I pulled out my phone and showed them the contact information for Detective Morrison. She's been very interested in talking to you about the Henderson case, as well as the Patterson case, the Morrison case, and the Williams case. Walter looked at me with surprise and pride. Andrea, how did you? I've spent the last 3 weeks working with law enforcement to build a complete case, I explained. Monica wasn't just stealing from you, Dad. She and her associates have been running this same scam across 3 states. The sound of sirens in the distance made all of us turn toward the street. Torres grabbed Webb's arm. We're leaving. I don't think so, I said calmly. Detective Morrison is very eager to speak with you about the forged loan documents and the threatening text messages you've been sending. 2 police cars pulled into the driveway, followed by Detective Morrison's unmarked sedan. As the officers approached, Webb made a desperate attempt to intimidate Walter one last time. This isn't over, Henderson. You can hide behind lawyers and cops, but we know where you live. Walter stepped forward, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he looked like the man I remembered from my childhood, strong, protective, and unafraid. No, he said quietly, it is over. I'm not the same man who was stupid enough to trust Monica. I've learned what my father was trying to teach me all along. Detective Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, approached with handcuffs ready. Vincent Torres Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and racketeering. As the officers led the 2 men away, Torres shouted back at us, Monica's going to disappear with everything she took from you. Actually, Detective Morrison said with satisfaction, we arrested Miss Kowalski this morning in Miami. She was attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with 2 suitcases full of cash and jewelry. Walter sank down onto the front porch steps, his legs suddenly weak. It's really over. The immediate threat is over, Detective Morrison confirmed. But there will be court proceedings, and you'll need to testify about the fraud scheme. After the police left, Walter and I sat together on the porch swing where Grandfather used to read the newspaper every morning. The autumn air was crisp, and the maple trees were dropping golden leaves across the yard. Andrea, Walter said quietly, I need to tell you something I should have said weeks ago. I waited, watching his face as he struggled to find the words. When Mom died, I was so angry, he began. Angry at the cancer, angry at God, angry at myself for not being able to save her. And then when Dad got older and started talking about legacy and responsibility, all I could think about was how none of it had saved Mom. I thought if I had enough money, enough power, I could control everything. Tears began running down his cheeks. But the money just made everything worse. It made me selfish and cruel and stupid. I pushed away the only family I had left because I was afraid that loving people meant losing them. I reached over and took his hand. Dad, Grandfather knew you were in pain. That's why he structured the inheritance the way he did. He wasn't trying to punish you for grieving Mom. He was trying to save you from letting grief destroy everything else you cared about. Walter squeezed my hand. Your grandfather was wiser than I ever gave him credit for, and you have more character at 28 than I've shown in my entire life. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the leaves fall and listening to the neighborhood sounds that had formed the soundtrack of my childhood. "So what happens now?" Walter asked. I pulled out the legal documents Patterson had prepared. "Now you honor the terms of the trust grandfather set up. You complete the gambling addiction program work with a financial counselor and earn back the right to be involved in managing the family foundation. And if I do all that, then we rebuild our family," I said simply. "We hire back the employees you fired, we restore the charitable programs, and we figure out how to honor grandfather's legacy together." Walter looked at me with wonder. "You would trust me with that responsibility again after everything I've done?" "I would trust you to earn that responsibility," I corrected. "Grandfather believed in second chances, but only for people willing to do the work to deserve them." As the sun set behind the maple trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt grandfather's presence in the gentle evening breeze. He had given me more than money or property. He had given me the wisdom to choose healing over revenge and the strength to rebuild what had been broken. The $82 million was still there, waiting to be used for good. But more importantly, my father was still there too, finally ready to learn what grandfather had been trying to teach him all along. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Henderson Construction Company, looking out over a conference table filled with the faces of employees who had been brought back to work. Walter sat at the opposite end of the table, his appearance transformed by months of counseling and sobriety. Gone was the arrogant swagger and expensive suits, replaced by the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to measure wealth in relationships rather than bank balances. Our first quarter results show that we've not only restored all the charitable programs that were suspended, I announced to the group, but we've also expanded our community outreach to include a new scholarship program for children of company employees. Carlos Mendez, the foreman Walter had fired, raised his hand. "Miss Andrea, on behalf of all of us, I want to say thank you for bringing honor back to this company. Your grandfather would be proud." The meeting concluded with plans for the annual company picnic, a tradition grandfather had started 30 years ago that Walter had canceled in his rush to cut costs. As people filed out chatting about their families and weekend plans, Walter approached me hesitantly. "Andrea, do you have a few minutes? There's something I need to show you." He led me to grandfather's old office, which I had restored to its original warm wood paneling and family photographs. On the desk sat a leather-bound album I had never seen before. "I found this in Mom's things when I was cleaning out my apartment," Walter explained. "I thought you should see it." The album was filled with photographs and mementos from my childhood that my mother had carefully preserved. Pictures of me at school, plays awards from academic competitions, newspaper clippings from my high school graduation. But what touched me most were the handwritten notes my mother had made beside each photo, documenting my growth and achievements with such love and pride. "She kept everything," I whispered, turning the pages with trembling fingers. "She used to show this album to your grandfather every time you accomplished something new," Walter said softly. "She would say, 'Look at our girl Thomas. She has your wisdom and my stubbornness. She's going to change the world someday.'" I found myself crying as I read my mother's notes, feeling her love reaching across the 2 years since her death to remind me who I was and where I came from. "Dad," I said through my tears, "why are you showing me this now?" Walter sat down in the chair across from the desk, the same chair he used to occupy when grandfather would summon him for difficult conversations about business decisions. "Because I want you to understand something," he said. "When I threw you out of the house that day, I wasn't just rejecting you. I was rejecting everything good about our family. I was rejecting Mom's love, grandfather's wisdom, and the values that actually matter." He paused, struggling with emotion. "The gambling addiction counseling taught me that I wasn't just addicted to betting. I was addicted to the illusion that I could control everything through money and power. I thought if I had enough wealth, I could somehow bring Mom back or at least prove that I was worthy of the family name." "But you were always worthy," I said gently. Grandfather loved you. He just wanted you to love yourself enough to make better choices." Walter nodded, wiping his eyes. It took losing everything to understand that the inheritance was never about the money. It was about proving that I could be trusted with something precious, and I failed that test spectacularly. "But you passed the second test," I pointed out, "the one where you had to choose between pride and family, between blame and responsibility." Over the following months, Walter threw himself into his recovery and rehabilitation with the same intensity he had once applied to gambling. He attended every counseling session, worked with a financial advisor to understand proper money management, and slowly began rebuilding relationships with the employees he had hurt. The most meaningful moment came on a sunny Saturday morning when we were volunteering together at the children's soup kitchen that Grandfather's Foundation supported. Walter was serving meals to families in need, chatting with the children and treating everyone with genuine respect and kindness. "Mr. Walter," said 7-year-old Maria, whose family had been coming to the soup kitchen for months, "my mama says you and Miss Andrea are angels who make sure we have food." Walter knelt down to Maria's eye level, his voice gentle as he replied, "Your mama is very kind, but we're not angels. We're just people who learned that taking care of each other is the most important job anyone can have." After the lunch service, Walter and I walked together through the downtown park, where Grandfather used to take me to feed the ducks. The trees were in full spring bloom, and families were enjoying picnics and playground time. "I have something to tell you," Walter said as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond. "My counselor thinks I'm ready to take on more responsibility with the foundation." "How do you feel about that?" I asked. "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh, "but also excited. For the first time in years, I feel like I have a purpose beyond just accumulating wealth or proving myself to other people." I smiled, thinking about how much both of us had grown since that terrible day when he threw me out of the house. Grandfather always said that fear was just excitement wearing a disguise. He was right about most things, Walter agreed, especially about you. That evening, we drove together to visit Grandfather's grave at Greenwood Cemetery. The headstone was simple granite, with his name dates and the inscription he had chosen, "Character is the only true wealth." Walter placed a fresh bouquet of roses beside the stone, then stepped back to stand beside me. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to teach me. But I want you to know that Andrea got the message loud and clear. She's everything you hoped she would be." As the sun set behind the cemetery trees, I felt a profound sense of peace settling over our little family. The $82 million had been preserved and was being used exactly as Grandfather intended, supporting employees, helping communities, and creating opportunities for people to build better lives. But more importantly, the relationships that truly mattered had been healed. Walter had learned that wealth without character was just expensive emptiness, while I had discovered that forgiveness without boundaries was just enabling bad behavior. "You know what the best part is?" I said to Walter as we walked back to the car. "What's that?" "Grandfather knew this would happen. He trusted both of us enough to believe that we would find our way back to each other." Walter smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I had seen on his face since before Mother's illness. He always did see the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. As we drove home through the familiar streets of our neighborhood, passing the house where 4 generations of our family had learned about love loss and the importance of taking care of each other, I realized that Grandfather's greatest gift hadn't been money at all. His greatest gift had been teaching us that true wealth comes from the relationships we nurture, the communities we serve, and the character we build through facing life's challenges with integrity and compassion. The inheritance had tested both Walter and me in different ways, revealing our weaknesses and our strengths. But in the end, it had given us something far more valuable than financial security. It had given us each other back. And that, I knew, was exactly what Grandfather Thomas Henderson had planned all along. What's the most important lesson you've learned about the true meaning of wealth in your own family? Have you ever had to choose between financial gain and family relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message about the power of forgiveness and second chances. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about families who overcome challenges through love and understanding. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey, and remember that character truly is the only wealth that lasts forever.